Alright, so I'm just gonna get started where we kind of left off. We were talking about indie labels, and this guy, he was Prince's former manager. He's done a lot of different kinds of stuff in the industry, but he's talking primarily about should you join an indie label versus a major label. I'm just doing this because it cut off last time here.
Now, you may, instead of getting, $250,000 to make your record, you might get 5,000 or 10,000. And there's a lot of, quandaries. Do we go indie? Do we go to a major label? What's the best for us? I'm even struggling that with, with my group right now. Do we go indie? Do we go to the major label? Well, there's pros and cons on both sides. Yes, if you sign to the big behemoth major label, you're going to get a bunch of money. You could be unrecouped and your career could be over tomorrow. However, if you are going to be successful, then you better be on a major label, because when that chairman says, gee, this record by the Four Chairs is getting a lot of play around the United States, I'm going to push that button. When he pushes that button, or she pushes that button, your records are in every store in America, probably in Europe, when they decide to get behind your record and push that big button. So if you believe in yourself and you think you're fabulous, then you're going to want to be on a major record label, because they're going to get your records into the stores. I don't call them CDs, I call them records. They're going to get your records into the stores everywhere, and they're going to get behind you. If you flop, you're going to flop big time at a major label, and they're going to kick you up, and you could be, washed up. Indie label, you can get a lot of attention on an indie label. You can get them working side by side with you, getting you out on the road, helping you sell your CDs off the road, from your car or from wherever you're going to be doing it, which is what bands nowadays should be doing anyways. They will help you. An indie label can send you out under the radar, and you can build a fan base in a lot of cities. So you're not going to sign for a lot of money, you're not going to make your CD for a lot of money, but they will pay you the absolute attention. And they have a lot of connections to get you into this club in Tulsa, this club in Phoenix. So the first time you get into that club, maybe there's 9 people that see you. The second time you come back there's 20 people, you're selling your CDs. The third time you come back, to Ann Arbor, now there's 500 people in the club. And so what a band really wants to do in that situation is an indie label will get behind you, you can get out on the road, you can build a base at colleges and do all of that, and you can get known. The bands have to tour these days. They have to get out and build that base in each of these cities and build a fan base. You've got to do that. And then you take your stack of CDs and you sell them at the gig for, $8 a piece. So let's say you're getting, $300 to play the gig, and now you sold another $300 in CDs. You're getting $600. You move on to the next city, and that indie label is supporting you. The problem with the indie label is they don't have the funding to be able to get you any kind of airplay properly in this day and age, which the whole state of radio in America right now is abhorrent. And they're not going to be able to really get the giant funding. Let's say your record starts to take off in Phoenix, and all of a sudden you're huge, and then it spreads to other cities, and they may not be able to react fast enough. Their distribution stream may not be as large. But I believe they both have functions. But, just in the case of Nirvana, they run Sub Pop. Eventually they had to go to a major. I think they went to Geffen to make them happen. There are a few good labels out there these days. There are some systems that aren't broken. There aren't labels that have been bought by, other companies that have nothing to do with the music business, and then they fire all the good people within them because they're cranking the numbers. Even the big behemoth record labels should have true little indie offshoots that just do nothing but get bands out there and build fan bases in these cities. And then if the band starts to make it, they can just walk upstairs to the behemoth. That to me would be the good model for it to happen. Because then your band isn't, you're not unrecouped for all these millions of dollars walking into your next record. You're not spit out by, what happens is at the majors, you get all of this money, and it really comes down to a bean counter within that label. Because the bean counter in the meetings that they all go into because it is a business. There's two words to show business, show and business. Artists have to understand that. But it comes down to the point where you say, God, we really love that group, the Four Chairs. We all think they're great, but geez, they only sold 70,000 units. So the bean counter, he rolls up his sleeves and he brings out his pencil and scratching his head and he says, we got to get rid of them. So you're done at the behest of a bean counter.
A couple of comments about that is that he talked about, and hopefully in this second part of the lesson we'll talk about touring and how that all works. He talked about how important it is to get a foundation. I used to hear that constantly from Guilford Tech when I was over at that school, because you can't really do anything without a fan base these days. Labels won't really even talk to you if you don't have any reason for them to sign you. I mean, it used to be back in the day, and we'll talk about producers here in a second, that if you got hooked up the label and you showed you had talent. I think Pat Boone was one of these guys back in the 50s who had like good talent. And so they hooked him up with some songwriters and they had some song publishers under their label and said, hey, play these songs, and they recorded them on these records and they sold all of this stuff. And they built their artists. Nowadays it's like they don't want to spend the money to do that. It's too much of a risk, because what if your stuff doesn't sell, if it doesn't work out, blah, blah, blah. There's too many risks involved. And honestly, I don't know of any label, very few labels at that either indie or major, that's willing to just pick someone out of nowhere because they thought they sounded good. Even if the A&R guy thinks that you sound good, he's probably going to sit there and say, well, are they selling CDs? How was their fan base? Are they doing any good? So it's imperative to get a foundation of a following and an influence, because if you have an influence, they're going to say, we want a part of that. So anyway, so producers and sound engineers, we were talking about this last week before the videotape cut off. So I wanted to capture this again. There's a difference between a producer and a sound engineer. Does that make sense? Like what we're learning in Dr. Caldwell's class, it's closer to right now is sound engineering and editing than it is actually producing. I would say the composition people are probably learning more about production than the people just in the class alone, because producing is really more of an artistic investment. So you have this guy who's basically, I would say oftentimes a friend of somebody in the label, or you're the right person or something. Really, you just got to pay for them. Anybody can get these guys as long as you got the money for it. But you hook up with these guys, and they get artistically invested in your music, because the label's paying them. If it's a major label, it's paying them like $40,000 or something like that to record your CD, and plus two to five. I think I've read somewhere that some producers get 5 points off the CD. He's getting 5% of the CD sales on top of that, so he wants it to sound good. So this is more of a guy who just knows how to put sound into a computer and just cut it and edit it. This is a guy who has artistic input. He knows musicians. He knows people in the area, and so on and so forth. So hopefully this video will work out again this time.
Producing basically is like a movie director. You're in charge of everything. You're in charge of the songs. You're in charge of booking studio time. Who's going to play on it? The musicians, the engineers. Imagine the.
Before I start that, let me go back, because I wanted to say something. What was it? This video has two guys in it. I can't remember what the first guy was. He's more of a Latin kind of producer, and the second guy he does a lot of hip hop, and he was like on the Making of the Bands. You guys remember that show on MTV? It came on like 10 years ago. He was one of the guys who did that. He's like involved with like a lot of top 40 artists right now.
Producing basically is like a movie director. You're in charge of everything. You're in charge of the songs. You're in charge of booking studio time. Who's going to play on it? The musicians, the engineers. Managing the budget. It encompasses the whole, nuts and bolts of ground, from the grassroots to mastering. Even giving input on who's going to be the mastering engineer. So the producer pretty much is in charge of the whole project with the artist and with the company. It is never by yourself. It's in conjunction with the artist and with the company, and everybody's in the same page, and it's a teamwork. But that producer is the point person for all the problems that have to be resolved and all the creative questions that come up. That producer is the point person on the project.
I mean, there's so many different definitions of producing, and people really realize what they are. You have your different styles. You have your Quincy Jones, who's like an orchestrator, who, he's the one, that's old school producing. Back in the day, producing was, rhythm section day, vocal day, and, string day, and, it was a big thing, you know. So Quincy basically had to piece everything together, you know. He's not sitting behind a drum machine making beats per se. Quincy Jones is in his mind saying, okay, I want the sound to sound like this, so this is my crew of people who make that sound that I want to, you know, hear. You know, that's one style of producing. Then there's another style of producing, which is what we do. You know, what myself or Pharrell or Jermaine Dupri or Timbaland does. We create, you know, we have all this technology that our imagination can kind of create this technology, you know, through this technology can create what we hear. And for us, it doesn't stop there, though. See, a lot of people think that it stops at the beat, you hand it off to the songwriter, and then the songwriter does what they do, and then like we don't touch the beat no more. We don't touch the record no more. We have to see it all the way through, seen it all the way through to the mix. So for me, what I do is, I'm a musician first. I'm a piano player. And people who don't, most people know that. If you don't know it, you know, now you know. I play piano. So, and I'm also a vocalist by trade. So I have to see it all the way through. I have to see it through the track, through the song. Even if I don't write the song, you know what I'm saying? I have to listen to what the songwriter did and approve it. If I don't like it, change the hook, this, that, and the third. This is all the process of producing, you know what I'm saying? Even down to picking the songwriters that you are gonna write with, you know what I'm saying? That is producing, you know what I mean? Then you go to the studio and you do the vocals, and or you may have a vocal producer. Like there's a part of my team as a vocal producer I work with. He's a great songwriter, great producer too. His name is Adonis Shropshire, but he's like the illest vocal producer I've ever worked with, you know what I'm saying? So like, I trust him, you know what I mean? As a producer, you have to have people around you that you trust. I trust him knowing that the vocals are gonna come out the way they need to come out. And if they don't come out right, I'm the one to say, hey, AD, that ain't really the direction, change it up here, change it up there, and he'll say, cool, and he knows exactly how to adjust. You know what I mean? Being a great producer means you have to have a great team around you, you know what I'm saying? I think a lot of people tend to say that you know, you tend to hear a lot of producers say, me, I, I'm the one, you know, I made this record, I. When really it's a team. Like for me, my team consists of my engineer, my co-producer, Kendrick Dean, another co-producer, Adonis Shropshire, you know, and then I in and out, you know what I'm saying? Between Adonis and Jonte, that's how my team kind of flows, you know what I'm saying? Then I have what you call a sub-team. Well, I've signed songwriters and signed producers under me that are helping me push my product around. So then I have Fatin Horton, who's a hip hop, you know, kind of like Pete Rock meets Just Blaze type producer, you know, and then I have this guy named Cage, who's hip hop but pop. He understands how to make mainstream, you know, R&B, hip hop type records too. Then I have songwriters, you know, a guy named Aeon Clark, who's like a phenomenal producer too, but he's a songwriter and lyric melody guy first, and then his vocal arrangements and stuff are crazy. And he did a lot of Day 26 stuff with me. I kind of introduced him through that medium.
Better understand it. If you don't, you're not going to survive. You have to respect it. Maybe you don't know how to do, maybe I don't know how to do a ranchera, but you have to be able to live what they live and understand what they're about, what they're trying to transmit. You have to respect what they're doing. You have to respect rock en español. You have to respect reggaeton. You have to respect salsa, merengue, bachata. Doesn't mean I have to personally love it or understand it, but you have to respect what they're doing and how they're doing it, and their marketplace, and who their target is, and the demographic. It's a very business-oriented job. It's just not a nice song. It's a nice song, and how do I get that nice song into the masses? You know, that's the trick. You have to respect what they're doing. You need patience. You know, you have to be patient. You have to use a lot of psychology. If you can buy psychology books, buy it. You know, really, buy some psychology. There's many great books out there. It's patience, psychology, knowing how to speak to people, knowing how to treat people. You know, not talking to them in a demeaning way, in a derogatory way. Being very, very nice to people will take you a long way. Believe me. It's not people, there's a misconception of treating people like dirt. No, it's being a nice person. You know, because, you know, on your way up, and you know, you're going to meet those same people on your way down. And you got to be friends with them. And they have to like you. And they'll help you get back on your feet. Because if not, you're toast. You know, you have to be a nice person and treat people right. And they'll remember you. That this is a nice guy. You know, so I think that's a really big quality also in producing. Aside from the musical aspect of that's important. That's going to come from your own talent. But once you get on a roll, keep your feet on the ground. You know, because things happen quickly in this business. You come here today, you're gone tomorrow. That's how it works.
So I like my small experiences with producers, it's like, producing is more like this when I'm in the studio with one. It's like, hey, can I hear a little bit more snare drum, or can you hit that harder in this way, or I want that sound of it, or can you turn, I don't know, the gain down on your amp, things like that. That's the kind of things that they do. It's the sound, if you go to a studio and you just rent the studio out and you have a sound guy that just plugs in all your audio samples or whatever, he's just going to plug that in, and whatever your opinion is, he's going to go with it. I mean, and it's true with a producer as well, but it's just a shared opinion, artistic opinion with the producer. That's why you pick a producer that is your style. You know, you go to a certain producer that is a certain style because he's done really well in that genre. You don't go to, you know, a producer in not your genre because it done well in that genre. You got to go on in your genre, if that makes sense. So I hope that, like, at least is a general overview of a producer. And we're going to have probably a few come in here and talk about production per se at some point. Also, the tour is it 2 weeks from now?
Yeah, 2 weeks from now.
Counterpoint Studios. That'd be cool to see because you get to see how it looks inside of they're more of an expensive studio, right?
I would call them the nicest independent studio in town.
Yeah, I would say so. Because this concept, and I don't know how dead true this is, but in a lot of ways that the days of these old $10,000 studios are still around, but they're not as prevalent as they used to be. And producers now are even walking into studios and renting those studios for like 3 or 4 days. And where he talked about how Quincy Jones used to have like a string day and whatnot day or whatever, and used to get, and he was really just getting union guys and just getting them in there to record, and then he would sit there in the studio and work on it. But nowadays, like once you rented the studio, you had your rhythm section there, you plugged it in, you had everything you needed in your Pro Tools track, and you take that home. and the rest of it's done in the producer's home, and he takes it in a briefcase, and you can even go to another studio that's cheaper if you need to do other stuff. It's just so much more liberal, the technology we have now. You can do anything you want. It's kind of cool, right?
Well, it used to be people had to go to studios to record.
Exactly. You have to. Now, even the producers now, once they've done most of their stuff, they're comping their vocals. You guys know what comping vocals, right? So we kind of talked about it in class this past week. But comping vocals is like, you want a good vocal mix, or even a guitar lick. Let's say you're doing a guitar solo, you would comp it. So you take like 5 takes of it, and then you take, you know, either the best one. I think Keith Urban, he'll take like 3 takes of like a song, and he'll just take like whole verses actually, and just put those together. But some people get down to syllables, and they'll like splice syllables together. It depends how good you want to get it. It's like, we got mostly everything, so I'll auto-tune this up, you know, because it's a little flat. Yeah, that's a little extreme though. But they'll go in there and they'll comp vocals in their home now, and then or they'll say, well, we need a steel guitar because, you know, let's say last week we were talking about my theoretical country band. So let's say, you know, I record the whole thing. I want a steel guitar on this song. Well, my buddy can record it, so I bring him into my house, put a microphone over it, and just plug it into Pro Tools and just do the rest from there. It's just amazing what you can do on your laptop these days, or a pretty nice computer. So now I'm still in my country band, and things are getting big. Let's say I'm signed with a major label. I like to use the bigger examples first because you can always shrink them down. If I teach just small examples, it's hard to expand upon it. So I'm hitting the road, and we're doing tours and things like that. And there's different positions that I'll need. If this is a big tour, I'm going to need probably get a tour manager. And there's tour managing companies out there, believe it or not, that actually just do tour managing. They'll have an onboard tour staff that you can get with merchandise guys and all these things. It depends on what kind of company you're going with, what kind of deals that you have. A lot of times people are just getting their cousin to be their tour manager. Or their merch guy, or their sound engineer. And at smaller levels, you know, you'll have like, when it's just like your band, if it's a 5-piece band, you'll have like your drummer or guitarist being the tour manager, you know, and then your other guitarist being the booking guy. So, it really, it went at the small levels, but when they get so big, I mean, you're talking about like YouTube, like, you know, their tour is so massive, they have to have multiple tour managers, multiple advanced guys, and usually the tour manager is just calling advancing the dates and doing the stuff, but they have to have people to call in advance just to do that sometimes, because it's just so crazy. When you have 2 shows, I mean, these tours get so big, they'll have like an A truck, a set of stuff, and a B set of stuff. I don't know what they exactly call it. I'm sure there's different names for it, but they'll like start in New York City, and they'll be setting up. It takes 3 days to load in there, which load in is where he's setting everything up. And I've never been in a group that's ever taken 3 days personally, so I'm not an expert on that. Don't ask me, but they'll take 3 days to do a load in, and then while the next city is ahead of them, or the next group is ahead of them, setting the same exact show, the same props and everything, while the artist is just flying from show to show, but you got two guys who are overlapping each other. Does that make sense? And U2 has to do something like that. I mean, if you guys seen the production they have, it's impossible to do it overnight. Or, you know, like most artists these days are doing like a load-in within like a few hours. And even some with none hardly because they're so small, if you're talking about club stuff. But some of these guys are doing 3-day, 4-day load-ins just to get the stage set up. And then I couldn't even imagine doing YouTube stuff.
You guys saw the YouTube rig, right?
Yeah, have you guys ever seen that? So I wasn't here, I was out of town, but I heard you could actually see their rig from downtown, from Rice Stadium. Because they have this big claw, and inside the claw they have like spotlight operators in there that are, it's insane. But it's a cool show. You should look it up on YouTube sometime. And my computer's going to sleep. So, the tour manager runs the day-to-day business of the tour operation of the tour. This is not necessarily the same thing as the manager, even though I know bands that have this. You use a regular manager to go on tour. Not all managers go on tour. It really depends on the deal that you have. They're the ones that call advance the day. They basically, for example, when I book a show and it's a touring act, they're calling me in advance saying, how'd you get A to B going? Do we need this and that? This has changed. Sometimes for freak accidents or changes that's come along on the tour, new equipment that's needed, something that they don't need anymore. For example, last summer when, trying to think of the band name, Thompson Square came to town. I think their guitar magically disappeared or something. I don't remember exactly the story, but they ended up calling the promoter and saying, hey, we need a guitar, which we had to call the backline guy, which I probably should explain that before I tell the story, but which eventually they had to get him a guitar, so that's something that you would advance if you need to. But they're making sure that the merchandise is counted if you're on a big tour and you have a whole semi full of merchandise, which is kind of uncommon even for big tours. I think they get local guys to do that, but you would call ahead and make sure everything's kosher, because the day of the show, it should just be boom, boom, boom. Everyone's loading in, everything's ready to go. Do the show, we'll load out and done. Then you got stage managers. These guys are for really big shows. They can be either on the tour or local guys, depending on the type of show. Trying to think of examples of different ones. A stage manager on a big tour that would travel would probably be on a package act where it's like you got several big artists, and they just got to make sure that I give these guys, they just got to make sure everything's on kosher and on time. Making sure that acts are going on and on and on, taking care of momentary issues, things that are going on right there. Again, pretty much you're just a general manager of the stage. That gives you an idea. Tech jobs. These are fun little jobs. In fact, we had a guy who was at Guilford Tech, graduated from Guilford Tech in, I think it was lighting and sound, and then he went off and worked for a company in Nashville that was one of these touring companies. And he ended up going on tour with Alison Krauss after that new station, I believe if I got the story right. It's been a while since I've talked to him. But that's just one tech idea jobs that you can actually work with a company that goes around, depending on whatever skill you have. You have lighting and audio engineers. There's 3 different types of audio engineers, if I can break this down. You have a front of house, you have a monitor engineer, and then you can have audio techs. On a big tour, or on smaller tours, if there is an audio engineer touring, you're just going to have a guy who usually does front of house. And even in a club situation, that your sound guy can do monitors for the band. So to give you an idea what monitors are, they are what you hear on stage, what the artist is hearing. So they're hearing their own mix in their ear. And the front of house guy is doing the mix for the whole house, what the audience hears. So there's 2 different mixes going on. And for these big tours, believe it or not, I actually saw a tour last summer where they didn't have a front of house guy, they had their own monitor guy that they used. And that was only because they had so much production going on that they wanted to make sure that they had everything on stage going well. And he was hitting the cue button and stuff like that for the audio. So they opted to tour an audio monitor engineer, which is kind of rare, from what I understand. But they have a front of house engineer that usually tours, it's very common. If not, they'll just hire someone local, that's up to the promoter to hire, and it could be in the contract or not. Let's see. The audio techs, my friend who actually went on tour with Alison Krauss actually was an audio tech. And what they do is, if they're touring, they're just making sure everything's running right. Since they come with the written equipment as part of the package deal, kind of neat job. They make sure if something breaks, they fix it, or or they find a way to fix it on the tour if they can. Audio techs can also be local hired guys through the promoters, through the rental company. And if it's a small production, you can have like one audio engineer there during the show, and if it's a huge production, you can end up with like multiple, a monitor guy, a front of house guy, a couple of techs to make sure everything doesn't explode, because you never know when it does. And then you have from the audio side, you have lighting guys, and you have a lighting designer. And I've actually just learned, and this was new to me, like as of this week, of a lighting director. I never heard this before. I've heard this concept before with like more Broadway type acts, but lighting designer is a guy who designs the concept of the lighting, comes up with a lighting package, and this is unusual. Like I've never heard of this personally, but I'm not saying it doesn't exist because it was in the book and this guy didn't want to read. So he said there was a lighting director who would actually run the console. The show was already pre-designed. He just made sure it happened. Basically, he was hitting all the cue buttons and things like that. But I've always seen lighting designers, if they do tours, I've always seen a lighting designer tour personally. But I would imagine if you had a big tour like U2, and that's kind of what I got the idea is that if it's a big tour like U2, you have a lighting director, not the designer going. But then you have like techs. That's what I did over the summer with Oasis Stageworks, is that I didn't really go on the shows too much, but I made sure in-house in the shop that when things went out, I had everything teched, which means that it was fixed. It was working right before it left the shop, in theory. so once it got to the show, all it had to be done is there was a tech there that hung it with an engineer that hung it and rigged it and all that stuff. Make sure it was flown in the air. And the designer was the guy who ran the light board. Does that make sense? Techs don't usually run the light board. That's not what they're hired on for. Not to say they're not knowledgeable enough to do that. They're just not hired for that job. That particular show. And there's backline gear. This is kind of a cool job. Backline gear is gear that's rented. The current, as far as I know, the only backline gear here in Salt Lake is Backbeats, and they got everything. And that's kind of the idea of a backline company. So they have, I've seen them rent out DJ equipment, drum sets, guitars, ionas, pianos. I mean, the list goes on and on of whatever you can do backline gear on. And this is pretty similar to Cartage, not exactly the same thing, what we were talking last week about Cartage. For you guys who weren't here last week, Cartage is equipment that are people who move personal equipment around. It can be rented, but it's typically the artist or the musician goes to the Cartage company and says, hang on to my guitar, I got these recording sessions and take it to the session. My backline gear is completely flat out rented. Does that make sense? And they do have services where you can either pick them up or they can take them to the show. Just all depends on the deal, what you're paying them, and the type of company and things like that. Everything's negotiable in music, you'll hear me say that.
It makes more sense when you think of bands going on, say, like Walls or Marshall amps.
Yeah, which I've learned those are all fake anyways.
Yeah, they didn't used to be, and they had to be rented because it wasn't practical.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I was with Jeff Little, he told me when he's with Keith Urban when they did that, or maybe I'm thinking of another artist. All my stories didn't mesh together, but they actually had on a semi like a whole wall of like just empty cabinets. They had no speakers in them. They just like rigged them up. In reality, there was that. They actually did use that Marshall amp, but it wasn't. They weren't using any of them. The cabinets. It was actually backstage pointing in an off direction, and it was mic'd, and it was like soundproofed and all this stuff. He said it was interesting when you're backstage because you have all these amps and you can't even hear them on stage, but they're all backstage pointing different directions from each other. They're all mic'd, but it's like interesting because you hear different things coming from different angles. And so being from backstage. But I mean, if you think about it, that's a great way to control the sound, especially when you got a whole arena full of people, So you have, oh yeah, I was going to say about backline. Backline, it's really hard, it's spotty. I've never really caught the whole system of when does a band backline or not. It really depends on what the artist wants is on tour or not. If they're doing a fly-in, I can almost guarantee the drum set's going to be backline because they're not going to fly with the drum set on the airplane, So fly-ins, there's going to be a lot more equipment. I can tell you right now, there's going to be a lot of equipment that's going to be rented that you have to rent. But if it's a touring act, who knows? Some bands tour with the drum set, some bands don't. Just all depends. Sometimes they bring their electric pianos, sometimes they don't. It just really all depends. On a cheaper, smaller act, you're not really going to see backline much at all because they know that the person who's paying for them to play it's not worth justifying renting all of it, basically. Usually, you only see like backline with bigger shows, really, where the acts are about 5,000. I don't know, I would guess 10,000 up-ish, that range. Then you have truck drivers and bus drivers. It's kind of a job you never really think about on a tour, I guess, but they're really crucial. And I've heard of bass players and just instrumentalists get hired on tours because they happen to have a CDL, and things like that. Who's going to drive the truck and the bus around the arena when they're all sleeping during the day? So bus drivers, truck drivers, local crew, you can, those are the guys, when you get local crew, they're typically with the union. Call them IA for short, or the local, whatever. Here's the local 99. But they'll have people who are pushers, movers, who will move the equipment around, loaders, I don't know exactly all the titles, but they basically move your crap around and help you set it up. And they're hired hands. There has to be a minimal amount of hours that they're hired for. I believe it's 4 hours still, and it depends on how much you get paid. We kind of talked about that last week.
I think it's a guaranteed compensation. It's not
Oh, yeah.
necessarily guaranteed time.
Oh yeah, if I have an artist that comes into town, the load in's only an hour and a half, right? But I need stage hands, so I go to the union. Well, I have to pay for a 4-hour minimum call, whether they're there or not. Which is kind of fair on their side because it's their full-time job to be stagehands, and I'll kind of give them props to that. It would kind of suck if you got hired on for an hour, and that's all you did all day. You might as well find a new job at that point. These guys are people who are experienced in handling the gear that's being moved around. That's kind of why you hire them. And then the unions do other things too. You get more into like bigger towns like LA. They're not just doing concerts; they're doing like movies and stuff like that as well. But they also, the unions will also have riggers a lot of times, and these guys are really skilled guys they understand how trusses, balance, and how rigging motors work. Because when these rigging motors go up, you don't want them you want these motors to be synced because you have one leaning, then you have one stress being pulled on one motor, and then you can have a collapse, and it's pretty embarrassing. And someone could get killed or hurt doing that stuff, and it does happen. So riggers are. I don't have the guts to do it. They usually have to go very high places, and I should have gotten a picture of one on these trusses because they have to get to these rig points and attach the motors by hand, and then throw the chain down. And then basically, when the chain comes down, they attach it to a truss. And there's a thing called a spare, and it's basically a nylon tube, if you can kind of think of it like that, and it goes around this hook that's coming down from the chain with the rigger. And basically, the guy at the bottom who's not a rigger is just going to be a stagehand or some guy working for the rental company or whatever, sound or light guys, or the stage guys or whatever, whoever may be renting from it. Just ties up the spare to it, and then basically, once everything's tied up and the rigger says go, there's a little, they call it a pickle because it looks like a pickle with a button on it, where it just goes up and down, and these things are all synced to go up together. So it's dangerous stuff. But it's really cool once you get all these trusses hanging. You can make for a really cool stage. Let's see, just to kind of a concept, how much time do we have, of what's kind of going on during a show. So you have your tour coming in, you've advanced the date, you got all the equipment show up, your backline guys are showing up with the equipment, they set up the stage. Usually you have the light guys set up the stage first if it's a staging company. Basically, the staging is always first because you can't have a show without a stage. Then the lighting guys are always hanging their lights, and you can have different types of lights from par cans to moving fixtures. They hook that all up, and then they raise their trusses for that. And then after that, usually at about the same time, the sound guys are coming in, getting their speakers getting ready to be flown, and usually the rigger, of course, is always getting ready to fly the speakers up in the air. So that's what we call flying them. And then they'll somehow fly them. I've seen very unique ways of doing it. I've literally seen forklifts used to fly. They'll sit there and they'll take a spare and they'll just wrap it around the chain and they'll just attach it to the top of just like a whole bunch of speakers and they'll just raise the forklift. just unusual ways, but ideally you want a motor, but motors can be expensive too sometimes, so I guess you use whatever you can get.
Like stages.
Yeah, as long as it's safe. Hey, you can do a forklift; it'll work. So
It's really tacky.
yeah, it does, but it works. If that's I thought it kind of was actually, then the speakers are going up in the air, and then the back at the same time the audio guys are coming in with the back line, setting up the drum set, putting all the guitars on stage, and making sure it's all up there. And we talked about stage plot last time. The audio guys and the backline guys are standing up there, or whoever was the promoter, or whoever, or even the stage manager can go up there and say, okay, drum set goes over here according to the stage plot. We need a direct box over here. Just putting it all together. And then comes in the artist at some point during the schedule. This is all scheduled out, the whole thing. Nothing just happens. It's a schedule of who comes in to set up the stage, the lights, the sound. It's all scheduled out. It doesn't always go on time. Things happen, but it does usually if it's a good group of guys that are been doing it for a while. So the band shows up, and you start your sound check. It always starts with the monitor engineer, right?
Usually.
That's true. But you always, and I've seen both kind of going at the same time, but it's usually, I would say monitors are first. I would even recommend it.
Monitors usually get rung out in tune before front of house does.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes sense too, because if you want to do a front of house sound check, well, everyone's going to just be playing the whole time around the stage because they can't hear each other and stuff. So you kind of have to do it first anyway. So you have move the mouse away. So you have the band that shows up, and they start with a kick. Usually, it's the most popular one. That's usually on channel 1. They go, okay, I want to hear a kick, and then there's different ways of doing this. But I would say if you're a sound guy, the most important thing is get everyone to shut up at this point and stop noodling, because that's something musicians like to do. And it's kind of annoying when you're trying to sound check and no one's paying attention, because if you do it right, it can go pretty quick, but if no one's paying attention, it takes forever. So the bass, guys hitting the bass drum, and then the drummers, you always start with the person that's instrument. He say, yeah, I want more or less, and they can hear each other. Sometimes they'll signal, it all depends. And so when he gets his level on the drummer's ear, he'll go to the next guy and he'll say, okay, guitar player, is that enough? And he's still doing his kick. Okay, that's good. All right, bass player, he's still doing his kick. All right, adjusting the levels, and he's like, okay, good. You just go around the whole band until that's set, and then they'll add the snare drum, and they'll go around the whole band again, and the auxiliary, and they'll go around the whole band again, and then you go on to the bass player. He'll play something. They'll go around the whole band again. You just do this until everything's equaled out and everyone has a good mix in their ear. Then everyone plays, and for the monitor guy, what they're doing the whole time they're playing is that someone eventually go, if it's too loud in my ear, they'll just like, holy crap, because if this is in ear, it's just going to blare really bad. But if it's monitors, it's not so bad. Wedges, we call those wedges on the speakers that are facing the band, or monitors. So once that's set, at the same time, everyone's kind of noodling around, playing a song. I would say within one and one and a half, 2 songs, the front of house guy knows exactly what he wants to sound like. I would say I've seen most of the time, especially if it's an audio engineer that's touring, he can do it like that. Okay, yeah, okay, okay, EQ levels here, all right, cool. And they're getting so sophisticated, they're getting thumb drives in these digital boards, right?
Well, yeah, they don't even have to sound check. They just, all their settings are in place, and all they have to do is tweak.
Yeah. So for example, if I booked the act, so I called the booking agent, I got the contract right in my hand, I flipped through the technical specs, and I see, okay, they need such and such audio board. And there's a specific reason why this happens. They need that board for a specific reason. It's not because he has a preference. It's because if this is a big tour and he's got everything synced up on his thumb drive, he's going to need that board to work with his thumb drive. And so you do the best you can. Sometimes it happens. It's not perfect world. I don't know, the board breaks or something. You have to get another one. So then they have to do it all manually, which kind of sucks, but at least you still get your show going. So you have the sound guys, you tell the sound guys, they bring the board, and then he brings his thumb drive, plops it in if they have that set up. And part of advancing the day, even going back to that, is, well, if something happens to that board the day before and it was the only one in town, then you advance the conversation about what do we do with the soundboard. what are other options? That's part of the conversations that you have. So, trying to think, what else do I need to cover on touring? In fact, I wish I hit record earlier because we had a great conversation before we started recording. I don't know if all you guys were in the room when we were talking about what I do as a promoter, but he was asking me what kind of shows I have lined up, and I was talking about a few concepts. I basically, what I do is that I see a potential act that would be good for a certain area, and there are promoters who are fit different types of genres. There's rock and roll promoters, that's just because what they like and that's what they're used to, and they know that market really well. There's hip hop promoters. There's I kind of don't really know what my niche is. Being honest, just kind of whatever works, I guess. But if I see an act, I'll go, hey, that's a really good concept. I wonder if I can book them. What I'll do is that I'll actually call up their agent, bring them into town, or I'll call their agent, put in an offer for them, negotiate a price, and figure out what technical specs they'll need. And I'll basically sign the contract saying I promise to pay X amount of dollars. And I've seen sometimes they'll do split deals, door deals, where they give the artist 80% after everything's paid, and then the promoter makes 20. Different types of deals can be made, or you pay a flat fee, it's called a guarantee. And once this is negotiated, what really the booking agent's doing a lot of times if they're getting ready to tour, one guy that I'm really negotiating with right now, he's actually worked at a tour through Salt Lake as I was putting in the offer, so I had good timing. And so what he did is that he basically got a list of offers piled up together, and this is kind of what's going on in his office. I'm just part of that pile. So he's actually drawn a line. I've actually seen agents do this. They'll send me an email saying, hey, this is the cities that I have. Did any of you have anything? So I actually see they've actually worked at a goal that they have. They'll go from this city to this city to this city to this city, and they don't have anybody to buy. It's just a concept that they have. And hopefully in these different cities, they'll find someone to buy their show. So as they're going through, eventually someone grabs on, and they'll say, okay, for this Saturday we'll be in Cincinnati, for this show we'll be in Kentucky, for this one we'll be North Carolina and South Carolina. It's just going on from day by day. And so you want to have your tour set up so that way you have as few down days as possible. Because if you have a down day, you're losing money. Because if it's a bigger tour, you're paying for guys to be on tour with you. If it's a smaller tour, you're still paying for hotel rooms, you're still paying for gas, for food. So down days is a bad thing. I mean, you're going to have them. It's just how it is. Mondays and Tuesday nights don't usually work out. It's just how it is. So, but they're going through on their tour, and as I'm putting in my offer, it's just in a stack of offers at this point. And then he'll take them, and he'll send them to the artist and say, hey, here's what we got for the tour. And they'll go through them, and they'll just say, okay, this guy wants 10,000, this guy wants 12, And it's relative. If it's a smaller venue, you can't, if no one's going to buy a $50 ticket for you, then you got to lower the price. So, some money's better than no money, right? So sometimes you'll turn them down, sometimes you'll take them. And sometimes you get turned down by the artist, sometimes you won't. And then they'll take them back to their talent buyers, promoters, venues, or whoever put in the offers, and they'll throw them back out there and the artist said yes or no. And sometimes it'll be an adjusted price that said, well, we'll do it for this amount, or yes, we'll do it for the amount you offered. And then the promoters and all the buyers have to turn around and say, okay, can we do it for this much? Do we still think it'll work? Is there any adjustments on the dates? Do we need to do a day before or day after? Which may not happen if they need to be in the next city. Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll work with you if it needs to change. But then after that, you settle it by signing the contract and sending it back and saying, yes, I'll do it, and it's official date. At the same time, for this promoter, before you sign the contract, you better make sure that your venue's booked, of course. And then once everything's set, you got to get all your backlines set up before the show, do all the marketing, and then hopefully you sell enough tickets to run the show, per se, to make money as well. And pretty much what I recommend to people is I really wanted to cover the topic of if you're an artist, you really need to get a tour on board. And the reason why I want to talk about what I do is because I think everybody should be their own promoter. If you're your own artist, or if you're a producer, or if you own a label or something, because getting a fan base is extremely important. The reason why I say that is because when I first started promoting, I got these phone calls of, hey, I hear you got this band, put me, put my artist up there. I want to be on front of the show. And after a while, I got like 20 people who wanted to be on the same show, and I can't do that. So I had to pick and choose. And I picked like one guy, I think, one band, and it was a pretty full night anyway. So I couldn't really put much on there. And I kind of had this idea. I was like, well, what if everyone just booked their own shows? Stop bugging me. And if you really think about that, like if I have a band and I want to get a following, well, what do? Get it from a following that's already working. So I book my own shows and I put myself in front of that act that I want to be in front of, instead of calling promoters trying to get me in front of that act. Does that make sense? So, I've tried to explain this to several people, and sometimes they don't get it, sometimes they do, but if you really understand this concept, it's risky, but even if you lose a few bucks on it, you've just gotten your name out there a little bit, and it shows the people that you're touring and you're doing shows. And you keep doing it enough, you're eventually going to get your own following, and you're going to headline your own shows, and you can start doing more stuff. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of time, but it's possible. It's not impossible by any means. So that's just different revenues, and if your band's making money off the shows that you're booking and putting together, plus other shows on top of that, and plus other types of revenue that we talked about, then you're actually not doing too bad. I mean, you're not rich, of course, but you're making a decent living maybe, and if you hit big, then you won the lottery basically. So these are, I want to review this again. Kind of, for those who were here this week and last week, I hope this map makes sense. This is what I showed at the beginning of the class last week. So we kind of see where everything fits now and how everything fits together, hopefully if everyone was here last week. So you have the recording side, the live side, the touring, the management, and performance side. And we've talked about how all these guys work together. So I hope it makes sense. Hopefully this class is as good as the last one. So to kind of conclude, I'm going to play this video. And I watched this 2 weeks ago, and it just really made me think. And I thought, like, this would be really good to show to the class, because he really hits the point where he takes all these different income streams and concepts and puts it all together in this video, to give you an idea how to make a living out of this.
I've heard more people tell me these days, get everything you can out of a record label because you're never going to see anything again. And, in a way it's true, in a way it's not. I mean, if you become, go out and sell 5 million units, you're going to make a lot of money off your deal. But it is true that you can make a ton of money on tour. And you're merchandising, and a lot of acts, and everyone, they're making a lot of money. If you're not a writer, if you're a writer, there's two forms to making a CD or a record. There's two forms to it. The person that performs it and the person that writes it. So like in the case of the Beatles, for the most part, they wrote and performed their own stuff. So your publishing deal is for those who wrote it. And your record royalties are for those who performed it on the record. So maybe you and I could have written, you and I could go out and form our band right now, and we could form a band and we could do Let It Be by the Beatles. We'll get the money for the record sales, but Paul McCartney will get the money for writing it. So there's two forms, two forms to that, and how those do. I forgot I got off on a tangent on that, but I wanted to explain the two parts to it. So a lot of times you can make money on your publishing as well. You might write a hit record that is a flop for your own group, but it goes on to become a #1 record for someone else. So you're still going to get a lot of money doing that. There's so many income streams involved in being a music artist. You have your performance for your record royalties. You have your publishing for if you wrote the song. You have your merchandising. You have your touring. And you have the licensing of those songs into film, television, and commercials. It can be very lucrative. Most artists these days get caught in that big trap. And that trap is, okay, we think you're great, your band, the Four Chairs. We think they're the greatest thing we've seen. We will give you $500,000 to sign, to sign your band. All right? We're then going to put, we're going to give you another $150,000 in tour support. Then we're going to give you this advance. Then we're going to give you that advance. Then we're going to put money into here. Well, you have to pay the record label back. They just don't give you that money and you've won the lottery. Out of that 500,000, you're going to probably make your record for $150,000. Then you're going to go out on the road, so you're going to take another $150,000 in tour support. Then you have living expenses out of that. Gee, pretty soon, you're what we call unrecouped. That's when you have to pay what they gave you back. Comes time to pay the piper. So you go out and have a big fat gold record. Wow, we're hot. We've got a gold record. Gee, that gold record, you're still owe the record company money after that record. Because let's say, I'm just using some round terms here, let's just say you're only getting $1.50 an album back and you sold 500,000 records, you could still be unrecouped. Now the label says, well, we think either they're going to drop you and say, get out of here, or they're going to say, gee, we think you're great, let's do another record. Now you're getting another $600,000-$700,000 that you're going to owe the record label back. You can be $1 million unrecouped to your record label, have a platinum album, and still not have any money out of your record label. Now again, I'm using very loose terms and I'm using loose numbers, and it doesn't always happen that way, but more often than not, it does happen that way. Or you get a whole bunch of money from a record label as an advance, and you go out and sell 75,000 units, and the label says you're out of here and your career is washed up. It's a real balance of how you spend that money. And where it comes from. But you can be a mediocre success. You can go out and have a gold album, and you can go out on the road for $7,500 a night, and you can play 3 nights a week. And so that's, what is that, 70, it's 15, that's 20, let's call it 22,000 a week. And you can play 50 dates. So I can't do the math, but 50 times 22,000 is a lot of money. So there are ways to go out there and make money happen. You have to be very shrewd about your money.
Does that make sense? A lot of different income streams. Yeah, like, people don't always make money back, and I kind of mentioned last class that ACDC, like, more than recently, just started making money off their CD sales because it just recouped or something. But so it happens. I heard that. I hear that a lot. But they're still paying for your tour, and you're still making the money off of that. They're not. I'll be honest. Record labels do put up a lot of risk. That's why they're getting developed artists and not undeveloped artists now, because they just want to know that they're going to recoup. You're going to recoup eventually. In a lot of ways, with the way that money's going, the economy's going, they're afraid to make deals and they're very cautious. You kind of don't really blame them. They can seem kind of shrewd and rude, but in my opinion, I don't blame them. It's just business, really. So, anyway, is there any questions?
When you see a show, how much gear is usually the houses, and how much do the musician or the people bring with them?
That's a good question. Let's see. I actually do have contract writers on this computer, and I'm trying to think. I don't even know if I should or not, but I guess it wouldn't hurt. Let me see if I can pull it up. This might take a few minutes to look up. Because it really depends. For a small act, I would say the gear that's going to be on stage is the stuff that's the gear that they're going to bring is their instruments, basically. The club, at a club level, they're going to have all the microphones, they're going to have all the sound, and I would say at a real professional level, you see a lot of small bands or local, they'll have to buy their own sound gear and their own mic gear, and then they come into a bar with their own stuff. When you really get the bands that are very serious, even at the local level, they're not going to be doing that. I've never seen a band, like a professional touring band, ever bring sound equipment. Think about that.
They generally don't.
I don't think I've ever seen it.
It's instruments if they aren't rented.
Yeah.
And even then, if you're on the road, you'll generally rent your instruments anyway.
The only time they bring their own stuff is when it's a tour so big that they're very specific about what they want. That's at the U2 level, the arena level sometimes.
So I saw Blast here on Tuesday, and they probably had. I was just kind of amazed at how many moving headlights they had, knowing how expensive they are. Is that something that you just tell the house, listen, I need 50 moving headlights, and that's normal to have?
It's really hard to say. I wish we can go talk to Greg right now over there if he was here. I wish he was here to answer that question. But shoot, I would say most of the time they're rented.
Okay.
And it's usually, and it's always the promoter's job to rent it, the buyer, because it'll say that. I wonder if I can find it in here, in fact.
Yeah, sometimes there are shows in a venue that doesn't already have a sound system, and so whoever is in charge of
Yeah. making
the show happen actually contracts the sound out to a company to provide you just the sound stuff.
Cancellation.
And then they'll be loading in, and then the musicians will come and play with their stuff. But it's also not uncommon for musicians occasionally to have some of their own sound stuff, usually microphones or in-ear monitors. And in that case, it's their responsibility to do it with them.
Just the things they get personal with.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. You do a lot of hardcore shows and you start noticing that the microphone starts to look really gross after a while. So they'll just bring their own, as they should.
Let's see, they're asking for sound wings right there. So they want to fly speakers. Outdoor stages, there's specs for that. Monitor deck, guitar tuning deck. These guys are specifying right here that they want, because, oh yeah, it's another job we didn't talk about, was guitar, music techs.
Yeah.
Because for big tours like that, they'll always, who's that guy who's always at the back of the stage like this? It seems like, and something breaks, he's like, that's that guy. They can tour, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. I would say there's always seems to be one guy that is tuning guitars, fixing drums for the band, and he tours the band because he knows their style, he knows them personally, he knows what they want. That's not really going to work with someone who's local and doesn't know what's going on. These guys, they're actually pretty crucial to actually the show happening. Let's see.
You can guarantee that every time you see a live act, a guy like a guitar player on a live act have a different guitar at a different point in the show, he has to have a guitar tech to keep track of who gets what guitars when, are they tuned or are they in good shape and so forth.
They have people like tuning just between every time they use it in an act.
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes, if you're on tour and something breaks, let's say that they're on the tour bus, they have guitars, like 5 guitars, and you see that something breaks, the guitar breaks, and it was their guitar that's tuned in G, or something, I don't know. So it's in that particular tune that they like for this song. Well, then they can call a promoter advancing the date, saying, hey, one of our guitars broke, can you rent us one? Well, what if something happened where they can't? Well, then you have like a tech out there who can. That's kind of how things on the road, sometimes they're just on the fly, you do what you can. At all levels, but usually for a show like that, I don't see why they couldn't do a guitar, there's a billion of them around. Let's see. Actually, it was really interesting. They call a promoter producer in here. I think I haven't read the whole thing. The purchasers. It doesn't really specify a soundboard, but it just says purchaser must provide a state-of-the-art wide array of sound reinforcement systems.
It's at the top of the next page. Purchasers should make arrangements for additional consoles, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, dynamic microphones. They didn't send me a plot for this, and I think it's with what they're talking about, the requirements, it kind of looked like they had somebody who maybe would be on tour and they advance it in the phone calls or in a fax or whatever. PA systems. Well, maybe it does say it in here. Doesn't really specify actually. Lighting. Purchaser must agree to provide their sole cost of expenses and responsibility of state-of-the-art lighting system that meets or exceeds the following specifications. The lighting, I can't read it, must have car cans, DWB load, 8 lights, 8 light units, and a minimum of 36 state-of-the-art professional moving heads, lighting instruments. Whoa. Okay, that's expensive. Like you go down to Oasis, you could probably get 36, but it's like per fixture. Depending on the fixture, you can get them. They start at like 150 up to like 300-ish. Times that by 36. It's a lot of production costs, and then you have to have someone to hang and rig it.
Is it normal to just say state of the art in the contract?
I've actually, you see it sometimes, and sometimes you don't.
I mean, who's to say, someone came out with a new light a month ago, is this one no longer state of the art?
Well, it says right here, acceptable moving lights are very light, Martin Max 700s, 2000, and 3000s, which are,
Okay.
Those are pretty good lights. I know exactly what those are. We have plenty of them in town. At least Oasis does. And you could get 36 movers, especially this time of year. During the summer, they're everywhere. It'd be hard to get 36 Mac 2Ks. That's what they're kind of called for short. But a 2K, to give you an idea, is a $10,000 fixture to $15,000, depending on the specs of it. So that's why they're a few $100 a day just for the fixture. But you know, you still got to break that thing in the air on the floor, and then you got to get adequate power to it. These things are just, you can't plug them in the wall. But yeah, I guess you could plug a Mac 2K in the wall, but the problem is, it just sucks. You can't plug more than one,
Yeah.
if I'm thinking correctly. Maybe you could get two.
So you normally have like transformers and stuff that you have to bring in.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're asking actually a very good question, because sometimes like Oasis, like for the Grand Kerfuffle, will bring in a generator, because you're talking about an insane amount of amperage, and you just can't plug that in a wall. You know, you blow a circuit, you'll start a fire. You know, for the Twilight stage, there's 2 3-phase power outlets. Does that make you know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, for those that don't know, there's a 3-phase power is what you get from like the street. You know, your house has a single phase, and there's 2-phase, and there's 3-phase. And 3-phase power requires 3 hots. So if you plug in an outlet, there's 1 hot, a neutral, and a ground. 3-phase has a hot, neutral, and 3 hots, a neutral, and a ground. And that's just an insane amount of amperage and power that your wattage you're just sucking through. And I think Oasis had 2 3-phase power outlets in there to run the whole area. And one 3-phase outlet was maxed out at 300 amps. And I think most of that was lighting. No, lighting and sound, I think.
Okay, here's a nerdy question. 3-phase power, so you have each hot, the phase, the AC phase is at a different position. Does that cause issues with phasing as far as the sound goes, that the waves are?
I don't know. I'd have to ask sound guy.
Because the equipment is run on DC power.
Okay, so it's all transformed
Yeah, it's
first.
transformed first.
Gotcha.
They just use the AC, the AC is installed just because it runs better on a big, massive distribution network. But everything is powered DC, so there's a little transformer inside there, and then there's.
So the reason it's 3-phase power is that you actually need the phase in different degrees, but it's just
I'm not
that you can
actually
get
sure
more power.
why they use 3-phase power, but when I first saw it, I thought it was the coolest thing.
It is the heaviest crap. Wires were so heavy because like one wire is like that thick, and it's just a solid mass ring of copper, and that's just one phase.
Yeah.
You know, and then you
I live
have
in
to
a
fire
warehouse
these
and I have
things.
3-phase power in my house. That's
Yeah.
pretty awesome.
It's let me put it this way: when we had 100 feet of they call it feeder cable that goes from the wall over to the generator or the power source over to the, it is the heaviest thing I've ever lifted in my life. And if at Oasis over the summer we had 3 boxes of these things, so you got like 300 pounds of feeder cable. You have to have a forklift. There's no way about that. If you want to get that on a semi or on a truck, you have to have a forklift.
So,
It's freaking, and it's like lifting like a dead body or something. It's just like dead weight. Like it's so
It's a
heavy.
new stick, right?
Yeah.
Along with like
A snake.
150-foot cable.
But yeah, they come in like 50 and 25, I think usually. You know, is there 100 foot? I can't remember.
We ran a pretty long one the last
Thank you.
show up in Jackpot, Nevada, summer.
Yeah.
So our journeys were like way far away for some reason.
Yeah. Probably didn't know, I don't know. But they also have this trick with the transformers where they'll synchronize 3-phase. There's a way of doing that so that way it doesn't buzz through a lot of equipment and create a lot of humming. But it just so that the way when the wave flows, that's why I want to get a power guy here because like the details I'm not exactly sure, but when they flow, they can actually delay them a little bit so that way they're not flowing together, they're synchronized and off. And then when one shuts off by accident, it doesn't disrupt the power flow. But really, in essence, it's starting from one phase, and when it maxes out, go to the next one, and goes to the next one. Give the idea how they work.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, you can, like a Parcan light bulb, right? It's 1,000 kilowatts, 1K. You can get 575 for a light bulb, but on a typical rock stage, it's 1,000K you're talking. And then you have, if you want to do a whole run, you have, they call it like 26 or 36K, so you have 36 lights going up. And then they put color in them, so they put like these little light filters. They used to be gelatin, so that's what they call them, gels. So they stick them in these lights, and then they would have these set for blue and these set for 5. But you know, if you have all of them on, you know, your 36,000 kilowatts running at once.
You're running 1,000 kilowatts, not just 1,000 watts to make 1K.
K's per kilowatt. So one light's taking 1K.
Okay, yeah.
Does that make sense? So you have 36 of these. Then you have a moving head that'll take, you know, more than that, you know, on its own. So I mean, that is a lot of power. And then you throw in the sound, the amperage from what the amps can do. Like, especially for these huge outdoor festivals, I mean, it is an insane amount of amperage we're talking here.
400 to 600 amps.
Yeah.
Is kind of the ballpark.
400, 600.
I'm not sure what it is for lights. It's probably more.
It probably is more. That's why I can't wait to do a sound internship, because then I'll be able to answer that question, because like I love lighting more than sound, personally. So I don't know why, it's just cool. You know, you hit a button, the whole stage goes nuts. You have a bunch of moving heads. So you know, it's a lot powerful that's turning on. You know, maybe someday I'll do a sound. Yeah, that's in my degree where I'll do a sound.
Yeah, outdoor shows are vastly different from indoor shows too. If this gives you a sense of amperage, the audio circuits that drive the front of house system in the venue are 200 amps. Or actually, no, I think they're 100 amps now, but they do some kind of seedy things at that place.
Yeah.
They're upgrading it to a 200 amp circuit.
Yeah.
But because you're indoors, you're not actually pushing sound out, and you're not losing so much energy. It's all bouncing around in the room, so you don't need as much power to drive an indoor system as opposed to an outdoor one. But 2 to 3 times the amperage to power an outdoor show as you would an indoor show.
So do you work at the venue?
No, not officially. I'm in
Okay.
there, kind of just helping out. Yeah, they have a long list of other guys to call before they get down to me.
Gotcha.
But safety in a show is really important when you're dealing with power, because things melt. And even at Twilight, there was a guy who was walking along. He thought, "Man, that's a really odd place to put out a cigarette." And it was like there's a little puff of smoke coming up around. It's a good thing he caught that, because it was like there was a stage pan, and it's one of those big honking connectors, and it just melted right through. Something got across, and shoot, like halfway through the summer, there were multiple wires and connections. Because you just take the connection off and just reattach the new one. Multiple layers. It was just, I should have kept a few, because it was just fascinating what power could do. You get like a sense of respect for it, you know? Because it was like you open it up and you see that it's burnt on the outside a little bit, and you open this thing up, it is just like all the plastics melted through completely. Yeah. It's because you got so much amperage going through a small connection. You know, if you really think about that, if you don't have thick enough wires for your shows, like you're going to melt wires. You're going to cause fires and stuff.
Well, you often have to spread them out and wrap them in such a way that they'll disperse the heat. I've seen bundles of cable catch on fire because they're like 200 feet long, and so they just plug the top in somewhere on the bottom somewhere else to keep the spool together. The spool will heat up and a fire will start.
Yeah. And another thing to be cautious, and this is true, not as bad as DJs, but you'll see this with rock bands where they'll plug everything in one socket. Oh my gosh. And you don't want to do that. That's just like an accident when it happened. In fact, I don't even like to do with the DJing stuff that I do. I try to make sure I'm on 2 different circuits, and you'll be fine. And it's not so bad with the DJing stuff that I do, because it's usually not so bad, but I was at an institute dance last year, and all of a sudden the sound just goes out. And so it happens after the second time. I'm like, what are these guys doing? You know, I'm not a sound expert here. It's not my forte, but I know enough, and maybe I can know something. And what they did is that they plugged all their sound lights, everything, in like some laptops, and then just like this one wall outlet. Everything was just off, like not even off the 2 outlets. It was just one, and going to a power strip that was going to another power strip to another power strip. I mean, it was just like, and no wonder why you're clipping out, buddy. It's like, so I was like, okay, let's take this, we'll unplug this, get me a power strip, and we'll plug this into here, and we'll plug that into there, and eventually it worked out. You just got to balance it out between circuits.
I've seen a guy
Yeah.
he was doing this outdoor gig, and there were the whole time outlets where he was, and so he plugged his DJ lights into the end of Christmas lights that were decorating the place.
Well, that's bad. Yeah.
No.
So we got one like 18 gauge wire.
Well, if you think about it, you know, you look at your stove, right, or your oven, and the coils get hot and they heat up. Well, really, what you're doing is you're doing the same thing. If you think about it, so to turn on your stove, what do? Well, you take a thin wire and you plug a lot of amperage and a lot of wattage through it, and it gets hot. Well, what do you think you're doing when you plug demanding equipment through this little tiny wire? It's doing the same thing. I came up with that conclusion on my own, and I'm pretty sure I'm pretty dang right. Because I've watched them how they melt wires and stuff.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, the stove element's meant to resist the electricity.
Yeah.
Unlike copper, but copper resists it anyway, and that's what makes it hot.
Yeah. And that's why, you know, you get on stage and you see power cables that come with things that are like thick, and it's just a regular wall outlet, but it's just because they know that whatever you're plugging into is demanding a lot of power, and you're just going to melt stuff if you don't have a big enough gauge and stuff. So I just sound smart and stuff. So, is there any more questions?
How often do you guys meet? Every other Thursday, you said?
Pretty much right now.
Next week, we're going on a tour of Counterpoint Studios. We're meeting here at 3 for carpooling. We're cooking down there at 3:30.
We can make that.
Counterpoint.